Welcome to everybody. Thanks for coming out. Before we get started, we wanted to figure out how many people here were actually or are still customers of Dyn. Yeah, a handful. How many were affected by the outage? Except for you. Where do you work? All right. Well, so almost everyone was affected by the outage. So it obviously created a lot of ripple effects over the course of a day, of 3 separate attacks, taking down Dyn servers over the course of 24 hours. Wanted to start out first going down the line and introducing yourself and what happened in your shop on that day, and how did you end up mitigating the circumstances?
Great. My name is Lev. I work at CircleCI in technical services team. So CircleCI sits right between version control systems and production systems usually. So we were hit not directly, like CircleCI was actually up and running that day, but nothing else was. So if you were trying to download a package from NPM, that would work 1 out of 100 times. And if you were trying to access various other services, and if you were trying to get on GitHub and see what was going on, none of that was really working throughout the day. And then sometimes it would work for like 10 minutes and then would stop again. So basically we spent the whole day just trying to keep our customers happy and sane, and telling them that this wasn't just them, the whole internet was down. They couldn't even get on Twitter that day and complain. It was great. So
hi, I'm Cory, co-founder, CTO of Rollbar. Rollbar is an exception monitoring service. We help you find and fix bugs quickly in your code, mostly. So we experienced, we were down for some part of the internet. We noticed the problem when our first engineer got online, and the strange thing was that everything kind of looked fine for us. Like, we didn't see a strange traffic pattern. Typically when you have downtime, like, something spikes or something dips, but a large part of the internet actually was still working, and they were able to talk to us still. So we started triaging. Obviously the internet told us, like, hey, there's a big DDoS attack, Dyn is down, and we're like, oh crap. So we started triaging, and we made some good quick decisions and moved our DNS provider somewhat quickly. And then the rest of the day was spent trying to tell our customers how to work around the problem, what the problem was, how we were owning it on our end, and how they can move forward.
Cool. So I'm Scott. I was one of the co-founders of StatusPage, technical co-founder, and now work as a product manager there. So I woke up to this, actually was in Sydney, Australia, and was about to travel home. And we have the reverse problem of when the internet goes down, we're the ones that need to stay up. StatusPage is a tool to talk about unplanned downtime, performance issues that you're having, or scheduled maintenance. Luckily, we were not affected. Generally, when people are using our system, it's because their systems are having a really bad day. And so days like when Dyn had their DDoS was when we get to shine, and when we're up doing the thing that people need us to do. So for us, the impact was minimal, just because we weren't using any of their systems directly, but some of our ancillary systems were affected. Integration partners that we have, third-party API calls, et cetera, were on the technical side. But for us, it was just, can we stay up through all of this traffic? So very quickly, our servers end up with 10x what our baseline traffic is, and we need to be able to be up and handling that. I think we sent more than 1 million emails and SMSs that day to end users. For people like Rollbar and CircleCI, saying, hey, here's what's wrong, here's a way to work around it, here's an ETA for a fix, here's where you can go get more information. So luckily for us, we had a very good day that day, and those are the days we need to be doing well.
Cool. Well, to follow up on that, you guys have a really unique location in the internet of status as a service. So you can sit above the fray, see what's happening across a pretty broad swath of the internet, how people are reacting to changes, downtime, outages, and then also what they do after the fact, how best practices change. What have you witnessed both on that day from a customer perspective, and then ultimately, what have people done to adjust their practices?
Yeah, so I will say that there was maybe one or two big takeaways from the day of, and then 1 or 2 big takeaways afterward. I would say the first big takeaway is that most people just expect DNS to be up and functioning, and it's generally systems that are large enough that an attack of even high sophistication generally won't take down a DNS provider. They generally are big enough that they can withstand this sort of thing, and they're used to it. And so the first thing I would say that we're seeing is just fear now. Like this was a really weird day for the internet to be taken down from such a focal point like Dyn. And the second thing that we're seeing is that the type of failure has more cascading effects than other things that would normally fail. So if you have network latency, you can generally get around that. If part of your storage cluster goes down, you can generally get around that. But DNS is so fundamental in terms of the underlying pinnings of how computers talk to each other on the internet that companies would just grind to a halt, not because their site was down, like that was really bad, but their customer support tool was reliant on DNS just like their production servers were, and their status page was reliant on their DNS just like their production servers were. And so we saw way more scrambling than normal on that day because all the tools that people generally use to help talk to their customers, to help service their customers on a bad day also got taken down with it. And it was something that they hadn't thought about before. I would say afterward, so I was just perusing a bunch of our customers in terms of the sort of the post-incident review around the Dyn issue. We're seeing a lot more people categorizing DNS as something that they're just intending to fail now. They're just expecting that this is going to be a thing that will continue to fail. And so they're starting to architect their systems around having multiple authoritative DNS providers so that they have some redundancy, whereas before they would just have one and assume it was up. That's definitely one of the big takeaways. And then I think the second takeaway is all of the critical systems around how to support their customers when their production sites are offline are going on to different DNS providers, or they're going on to different infrastructure, or they're asking us, hey, where do you, as our status page provider, where do your production systems live? And how can we make sure that we're not overlapping with you as best as possible? So we try to run a couple things in parallel wherever we can. And we have customers that are now interested in making sure that their support sites and their status pages are sort of cordoned off from everything else that their production infrastructure and our production infrastructure runs on, so that they know, even in a worst case scenario, we have a couple systems up that we can use to still be alive and be a good company on those days.
Okay. And then Cory, so more and more systems like ours at Circle, at Rollbar, at StatusPage end up being these daisy chains of third-party services essentially strung together and being highly interdependent on the availability of each service to deliver value to the customer. Like, what implications does that have today from an architecture perspective, and tomorrow when you think about how you change your production system beyond just taking the ancillary services and cordoning it off? What do we do from an architecture perspective to start ameliorating that situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it doesn't have a simple answer. I think that the push towards architecting systems that can handle failover or failure with lots of redundancy, with lots of clever hacks, caching of various things, I think that's great. And I think it depends on the stage of a company that you're at and who your customers are. Right? Like if your customers are people who are looking to you to tell you if their site is down, then yeah, you have to focus on that day one. I think that if you're a company selling handcrafted goods on the internet, you could probably spend your time architecting your system, doing best practices, but not really digging into it as much as you would if you were some of these other companies. So I think that it's really good that people are a little bit afraid because the interesting thing about DNS is that it has always been a single point of failure, and the only reason it hasn't really been taken down is because, well, it's been taken down many times, but the reason this is the biggest time is because people have kind of become complacent to where they have their providers, right? So like DNS used to be a distributed system, and now people are using a single service because they provide an amazing service, like geo load balancing, amazing uptime. Like Dyn is a great service, but they're relying on a single point of failure. So for us, I think that, and for all software as a service companies, if you're building a tool that talks to other services that may or may not have been architected by people who are thinking about these problems, you really have to think about it, and you have to own that whole chain because your customers don't care.
Yeah, and so we were talking about it in the back, like how do you build up that trust between service providers? So
Yeah.
if we're relying on AWS, we're relying on Dyn, we're relying on all of these third-party providers, what's going to be the conduit through which we can ensure that that relationship is good? Not that I have any answer to that, but I'm more
Yeah, I
curious.
think that's a really big question, and it kind of speaks to the type of businesses that that are popping up that have this problem. So I don't know how to solve it. You know, some companies use SLAs, some companies just do it based off of trust. And I think actually to speak about trust for a second, like that's really important if you're one of these companies who has to be up. And I think the way that you tell your customers about what happened, you know, if you're honest and you're humble and you own the problem as much as you can, that's going to create the trust from your customer, which is going to allow you the runway to really hire the people that can focus on this in the long term. And so I think you have to figure out who you want to trust. And I think that's actually probably the best thing that you can do right now.
And that dovetails into the conversation that we were having, which is about how do you communicate with your customers when these things actually happen, especially in situations where services that are entirely outside of your control take your system down. And how do you communicate that to your customers? How do you make sure that you maintain that level of trust and customers feel like they're being listened to?
Yeah, I think that's super important, and that's kind of what I did that day. So I'm running technical services team. I'm on the front lines dealing with customers and fielding all these questions that were coming in. And I think the things that I take away from that day are, one, don't make any assumptions about your customer's problem, because first, it's very easy for legitimate issues to get like drowned in like everyone saying that the internet is down, because like it's very possible that some people's builds are in fact working and they have a real problem, and you can't just shoot them away and say, wait, it's going to be fine later. The other thing that I would say is don't make any assumptions about what the user actually knows. Like, not everyone sits around on Hacker News and Reddit all day long. They might not even know that the DNS is out. So as a support engineer or a customer success person, if somebody's coming to you and they're the 100th customer that's complaining about the same exact issue, I think you should treat them as if you were they're the first customer that's complaining about this issue, because you have no idea what they just did for the last couple hours. So I think just being empathetic to them and not making any assumptions is a great first step. I would totally echo what Cory said about owning the issue. Like, yes, we can't control the internet at CircleCI. We can't fix every single issue that goes wrong, but it's not enough to just shrug off shoulders and go play ping pong. We have to own as much as we can and take the lessons that we learn from these types of events and improve ourselves. And things that we can do to do that are, have a backup plan, have a disaster recovery plan, and not just have it, like try it out, see what happens. The worst time to have a disaster recovery drill is during an outage, and I think that most companies, that's like their only opportunity to ever try out their plan. And it's too late then. So things like that. And then afterwards, we got dozens of emails and support tickets asking, okay, great, this is done now. What are you going to do next time? How do I know the CircleCI is going to be how do I know the CircleCI is going to respond to this next time and be more available and allow me to continue to do my work? And you don't have to tell them anything immediately. I think it's important to go meet with your team, meet with your stakeholders, and decide how much tolerance you as a company are willing to have to this sort of failure, and then come up with a plan, implement it, use it, and share it with your customer. I think there's nothing more important than being honest. But if you respond to someone saying, hey, we're going to fix all these issues, and then next week there's another outage and you haven't done anything, that's probably one of the worst possible things you can do as a response to that kind of question.
Well, and so how do you deal with fear and uncertainty? Right now, we all know that DNS is a single point of failure, but there are probably a multitude of others that we are aware of, kind of put under the rug. What do we do next? Like, as organizations, do we have people started the process of sort of inventorying out what are the next other fragile parts of the system and start planning against it? Or how are you folks dealing with whatever the next outage is going to be beyond DNS?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. So actually, we had a disaster recovery line item in our roadmap for, the whole quarter, and this just like really, this really like, pushed that thing forward in our minds as like a super high priority and very valuable. So yeah, I would say inventory everything. Make sure that you really understand all your single points of failure. Make sure that you understand not only your system's single points of failure, but your product's single points of failure. So if your product relies on sending emails, right? Like we send emails through Mailgun. Mailgun is a single point of failure. And I think that you don't necessarily have to fix all of those things. You have to prioritize, but knowing is the first step.
Yep. What about at StatusPage?
I would just say in general, I think that my main takeaway, and it's sort of related to the question that you asked, my main takeaway from the Dyn issue was, Dyn used to be this sort of stalwart of like consistency and uptime on the internet. And it wasn't that it was like a state-sponsored, sophisticated attack that brought them down. I think what's instead changing is that attacks are getting easier. I think in that specific case, it was a bunch of IP-connected cameras that were compromised by this sort of swarm of scripts. And I think what that means for startups is the game is going to get a little bit harder around your ability to respond to and recover from these things. Just the bar is a lot lower. So your ability to deflect attacks as a startup, whether it's security or DDoS related, used to be at a certain bar, and now the bar is a lot higher for you to be able to sort of withstand what's possibly going to be coming at you. And so I would say that I haven't heard of anything specific, but my guess is that customers of ours are probably getting a lot more inquiries about resiliency of systems, what they're doing to protect against it. We were recently acquired, so we now have the benefit of being a public company. We have people that full-time think about disaster recovery, business continuity, and I think that competency used to be reserved for much larger companies, and sort of as you get into hosting more high-dollar enterprise customers, and we're probably going to see that competency shift down a little bit more, where this is just something that you're going to have to be decent at and be able to tell a good story around and be transparent around. Not that you have to have everything fixed, but just to show that you've thought through different failure scenarios and sort of the impact that it could have for your customers.
Yeah, can I add another thing?
Yeah.
So I think it's also really important to plan for this thing in lots of different ways, because something like this is going to happen again. And one of those ways you could do it is hiring people with diverse backgrounds and skill sets. So I think if you find yourself in a company where you have pretty much the same skill set as everybody else in that company, and then something that is out of your wheelhouse happens, then you're going to be kind of SOL. So one of the big things that you can do is build a resilient team to build a resilient product. And I think that's really important.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
What about in our shop? I mean, we have you to take care of disaster recovery, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
But when you're on the front lines, customers are coming to us wanting to know, to your point, what are we doing to stop the next attack?
Right.
How can we guarantee that we're up? And if you thought of sort of customer trust is a glass of water,
Sure.
we certainly took a couple of gulps over the course of that week. And so, like, what are we doing from a customer perspective to sort of refill the glass?
Yeah, I mean, we're still iterating over our response and our strategy for the future. We've committed internally with our SRE team, engineering team, obviously the technical services team, to be more transparent with our customers and to also share what our plans are with them. So I think that this is not an easy problem to solve. It's not enough to just like have your own, it's not enough to rsync Etsy host records to every server you ever make for the whole internet. Like you can't just do that, right? Like that's one solution. But so there's definitely a lot of different things that we can do. And I think that inventorying all of our resources, figuring out what the most critical systems are, and it's almost sometimes okay if only parts of it if some parts of it go down, but others don't. Like, how do we keep the most amount of things up at one time instead of, because if you can't solve every single instance of every product out there, then what can you do? Like, CircleCI is in a very unique position because, like I said, we support every single language, every single framework, every single library, every time a new JavaScript thing comes out, like every customer we have switches to it, and then we're basically DOSing NPM. How do we figure out like what are the most important things that our customers need in order to keep building and try our best to keep those things up and running?
And so what do you guys think in terms of at what stage of a company do you really start thinking about internalizing disaster recovery? I mean, we're all at sort of different phases of the company life cycle. You're acquired in public. We're Series B and you're Series A. Right. And so I'm sure disaster recovery, well, maybe at StatusPage it might have been on your roadmap very early. But I think for companies like ours, it's like, oh yeah, we probably should be focused on uptime, but that's always item number 6 on a list that you only get through 3. So how do you deal with it if you are either pre-product market fit or immediately post-market product market fit, but trying to figure out how to scale? Like, any advice for companies as they're thinking through how to prioritize their efforts?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like at the early stage, going down due to a DDoS attack is probably the lowest on your list in terms of what's going to kill your company. What's going to kill your company is building something that nobody buys. And so, on the earlier stage, it's almost no focus is given toward disaster recovery or how do we build redundant systems, because you're just trying to figure out if the thing you're building is actually going to be a thing. And so I can tell you from StatusPage's end, we thought about this more and more as the customers that we wanted to land carried bigger and bigger price tags. So not only did they come at us with security questionnaires and they wanted to just understand what is it that you guys are doing to think about failover redundancy, how many data centers do you have, where does the data live? We actually wanted to use it as an offensive tool to say, hey, we've actually been thinking about this a lot, like maybe more than you would expect a startup of 5 to 10 people to think about. So we tried to use it early on as an advantage to us, but only because it wasn't a ton of investments. We were still focused on our customers, we're still focused on product market fit. Along the way, we could do some cool things to flex a little bit of muscle to say, hey, we've actually thought about this maybe more than you would think. And I think that worked out well for us. So at the time we were acquired, we were 15, 16 people, but we had like Visa as a customer. Like, that's a pretty cool thing. And I think we were able to find the right balance between how much investment can we make and show off versus what sort of contract size are we looking to sign. So if for us, it was a lot of a gut feel, always making sure that we were staying focused on like, can we still get people to sign up for our product and buy it? And if that's going well, then we can make some more incremental investments in making sure that our system was resilient.
Yeah, I think that, so it's an interesting question because, yeah, you have the product market fit, you have the runway and resources, people and money. But you also have your customers who, depending on your business, are going to be impacted more than others. So I would say start thinking about it when, if it did happen, it would completely blow your business up, right? So like Dyn as a company, they probably had to start thinking about DNS DDoSes very early on. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a lot of things that you can do in just architecting your system that will help in these types of situations. So maybe not specifically for DNS, but say for like a data center outage, or say for like a network partition. Like, there are all sorts of disaster scenarios where smart architecture is going to help you in the long run. And I think that the earlier you think about that stuff, maybe not implement it, but think about it, the better. And if you're building a system that has an API tier and a web tier, and like for us, like a backend processing pipeline tier, we can shut off one of our databases and everything still works because we've planned for that kind of a scenario. And by the way, that's really good for doing deploys, upgrades, maintenance. So I think that try to dovetail in your disaster recovery scenario plans with decoupling your system, and do it when decoupling makes sense, obviously.
Certainly. I think when an easy one is not like hard coding a service provider into your product. Like, don't say that this only works on AWS for whatever reason, or in this AWS region for whatever reason, because you're just setting yourself up for failure. As Cory said, I think that it's actually really easy to get like the basics right here. Like, don't put yourself in this horrible box where you are creating a single point of failure in your distributed system, right? And the other thing that I would say is, oh my God, it slipped my
Well,
mind.
I was going to follow up on that. How many companies actually do it right out of the box, though? I mean, I'm sure all of us are guilty of hard coding 1 or 2 or maybe 15 dependencies directly into the system that you spend then 3 years trying to pull apart. And so it's a balance, right? It's a question of like, what's the proper abstraction away from how fast can I get going to try and figure out whether or not this is worth anything.
I think one thing I've thought of, the thing I was about to say is like, even if if your disaster recovery plan means that it's going to take you 2 hours to go spin up your data center somewhere else, that's so much better than spending 48 hours waiting for someone else's thing to be fixed. So it doesn't mean like you need to have 99.99% uptime. It just means like you have a plan that even if it takes quite a little bit of time to get all your stuff working somewhere else, at least be able to, it's in some capacity. I think that's a good strategy.
To your point about, like when do you start doing this? So like at some point, somebody starts a project and it's on their laptop, and then they push to GitHub, and then they hook up CircleCI, and then like they're sort of iteratively building their thing, and you always have single points of failure no matter what stage of company you're at. Some of the interesting things with regards to building a resilient system, especially with a lot of people who are building startups these days, is that we have all these platforms. Like, so AWS, they have serverless, it's just somebody else's server, but they have serverless options, right? But if AWS's power goes out in one of their availability zones, like, you have to think about that. So you've kind of offloaded your disaster recovery to some other single point of failure, who, granted, has a lot more resources than you do, but you still have to think about that, especially early on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as a startup, I mean, how far down the totem pole are you in terms of when you're going to get lit back up, right? So they're probably going to start with Visa because they spend more money. And eventually they're going to get to you as you get down towards the bottom end of the totem pole. I mean, I wonder, are we as SaaS providers, are we as sort of the canaries in the coal mine more exposed to the vagaries of the market and the vagaries of the system than if you are a Capital One and have 10 distributed data centers internal to your own operations, although maybe not Capital One, Bank of America. I wonder how much and how uniquely exposed our part of the market actually is to these kinds of changes.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the security attacks that happen, they typically go after places that have lots of passwords, right? And yeah, I would say, like, for example, Mongo Lab is very susceptible to this type of thing because, lots of companies were using Mongo Lab. And when that happened, was it like 2 years ago? Everybody had to change their passwords, and it was a huge pain in the butt. So like, they're going to go after, even if you have a really simple product, but it provides some amazing value and it also stores information about users that's valuable to someone else, like, you better start thinking about this soon.
Yeah. So questions?
This one right over here.
One example is extortion. People, they're frequently preceded by requests for Bitcoin transfers.
Yeah, they think in this particular instance, there was research that was put out by Dine's research group that linked efforts at extortion with the actual people that were protecting companies against DDoS attacks. And so it was kind of a hand-in-glove sort of arrangement. And so they think that there's potentially a connection between the attack on the 21st and that research when it came out.
Yeah. I think GitHub too has weathered many state-sponsored attacks, at least from what they've not officially commented on, but unofficially commented on, of if you host content on the internet that a government doesn't like, they might want to take that offline. And that's the easiest way for them to do it.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, you mentioned it before. It's amazing how cheap it is now. I mean, this was baby monitors, webcams, anything that was an internet-connected device. I think they found something like 500,000 that were part of this botnet that generated tens of millions of IP requests. So it's, it's so easy, kids can do it now. So.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere, sort of the earlier days of the internet, hosting providers. Hosting providers used to attack each other because that would directly affect their customer base and potentially like move it over. So it's nothing new.
I can say that we are not right now. I think that what's interesting about this attack is that it's technologies like that are before we know it baked into and fundamental to us being able to operate our problems. You know, if you accidentally rip out a cache layer, like your site's probably going to come down, but you just expect that cache layer to be there, and there's only one. And so I think this is a good example of we've become so reliant on these fancy technologies that may be specific to some providers, like Dyn. Like I know a lot of their big pitch is around geo-balancing and failover. And I think just to your comments around serverless, or if you use Lambda with AWS, if you need to get off of that in a hurry, you're in a bad place, like a really bad place. And so for people that have these vendor locked-in technologies that are, even if they're best of breed, awesome, allow you to operate for way less money or way less computers, I can see there being some reticent questioning around like, well, this would be great for us, but if it's gonna be that thing and we can't do that thing with another vendor, maybe we need to just go without it. This is kind of the strategy that we've adopted with StatusPage, which is if we can't control all the failover to a whole new data center, we're not going to use it. And so AWS wasn't supporting region replication with Postgres, and so we just ran our own Postgres for a while. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that until we get comfortable with things like Anycast or geo-balancing becoming industry standard and like publicly spec'd where other providers can implement it.
It's hard for me to speak to that because SRE team is really taking the lead on making those types of decisions. It's tough because we weren't directly affected again by it, so it's hard for us to look at. It's unwise, I guess. So the things that we're focusing on right now are how do we ensure that we're able to communicate with all these external services. So we're just hoping that they are thinking about these issues. So thank you for thinking about these issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the really annoying things was that once we moved, once we added Route 53 as our DNS provider, one of our DNS providers, we had to, in order to do that, we had to go to Namecheap's website. Namecheap was relying on CloudFront. CloudFront was calling back to Namecheap's CDN servers, which were affected by Dyn. So Namecheap's website just showed up, and it was just like no formatting, no CSS, no images, no nothing. So there was like all sorts of fun tricks that you had to do, and this was actually kind of a fun like day. Like it's something like doesn't happen all the time. So you know, we had some fun tricks, like we tunneled our traffic from our laptops through our data center, which was running DNS mask, which meant that IPs were cached. So it was like, and it worked. And we knew how to do that because we had those diverse skills. And I think that, I can't reiterate the importance of that.
Yeah, we also I was trying to get on Zendesk for some reason to do tickets, I guess, but it was down periodically. So finally, we didn't have anything cached, but I think in our log somewhere, I found like an instance of their IP from like 6 weeks ago, and it totally worked. And I was really happy that I was able to add it to my Etsy host file. I just shared it with the team in Slack, and everyone was just doing tickets again. It was amazing.
Wow.
Good time.
Good on you.
On the CI side, on the CI and CD side, like realistically, we're already pretty commodified. I mean, we allow the user to essentially set up the YAML file any way they want to outside of just it being circle.yaml. They could pretty quickly port that over into another provider. So the barriers to entry and the barriers to change, switching costs are fairly low in our industry, which we have to combat through a number of other ways. But I think from our perspective, at least from the Circle perspective, we believe that we need to compete not on vendor lock-in, we need to compete on value. And so if people need to forklift their build and move it to another provider, there's nothing that can really stop us from doing that. And I don't think we would want to do that.
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier about how a lot of services that you see out there today aren't really that hard to build necessarily, more or less, right? But there's a reason why StatusPage is StatusPage, and et cetera. So I think, and like Jim said, you shouldn't compete on vendor lock-in because that's a losing strategy in my opinion. We should compete on everything else. So I think personally, I was going to say this is unfair because my CEO is sitting next to me, but I think it would be great, if we did as an industry come together and say like, all of us are affected by this horrible thing. Let's not go back to the 80s and DOS each other. Let's figure out a way where we can come together and figure out how to prevent these types of attacks from disrupting our lives. And I think we could do it, and I think we should.
Yeah. Part of what you said had an assumption in it, which was interesting, which was like you have to get in bed with some of these larger platforms if you're providing a service like ours. And I think that's true to a degree, but I think we're not hosted in AWS. We've built out pretty much everything on bare metal, and I think that decision was originally made because we didn't want to be down when AWS was down, and back then they used to just like phantom reboot EC2 instances. So we made that.
They still do that, by the way. So that hasn't stopped.
Note to my infrastructure engineers, no AWS. Just kidding. Yeah, Chaos Monkey is built in, right? Yeah, so I think that assumption is not necessarily accurate, but it really does require you to do a lot more work, right? Like, we're running our own MySQL hosts, and we're not able to use something like RDS, which does all these nice things for us. But in doing so, you end up understanding everything a lot better, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would just say too, like, vote with your dollars. Like, if you're spending a lot of money with Amazon and there are things that they have that you would like to use that you're worried about lock-in, let them know. As our industry, we're going to get into a bad spot if we just continue to flock to the shiny shovel that comes out, even if that shiny shovel can only be used in Amazon. I think if Amazon spent a lot of time developing incredible technology that nobody adopted because they were worried about the lock-in, they would probably rethink a little bit of their strategy, or we'd all move to Google because Google may be more apt to do something like that.
Yeah, and lock-in, like after you're a certain size, it doesn't matter. Like look at Netflix. Netflix doesn't go down, and it doesn't go down because AWS provides the tools for them to build high availability. And I think like once you can implement true high availability, like you probably don't care about vendor lock-in anymore.
And when you say that, you mean like you have enough people
You
around.
have enough people, you have enough money
Yeah.
to pay for AWS, or you have enough clout where you can be like, hey, AWS, we're like a third of your revenue.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's like when you owe the bank $100,000, it's your problem. But when you owe the bank $100 billion, it's their problem.
Yeah.
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 So.
Yeah.
Give him a round of applause.